They've been floating on the Indian Ocean for over a month, and the government now wants to dump them in the desert. There's children involved in all of this, very young children, families, and Scott Morrison is doing everything he can to make their lives more difficult and to ensure that they keep suffering.
There are also questions about whether any incentives were offered to India in exchange for its cooperation with this boatload of asylum seekers. Yesterday, the Immigration Minister, Scott Morrison, flatly denied that there was any incentive, but today reports in the Australian newspaper that Australia has offered to help out India in its own fight against people smuggling in that country and also its fight against transnational crime. So we haven't heard from the Minister in relation to that today, and nor are we likely to. Vanessa?
David Lipson, live from...
Well, after weeks of uncertainty, 157 asylum seekers held on board a customs ship will now be transferred to the Australian mainland. The government insists that they will not be resettled here.
Nonetheless, the move has raised the hopes of refugee advocates and potentially changed the legal position. National Security Correspondent Michael Brissenden reports.
For nearly 4 weeks now, the Tamil asylum seekers have been floating about on the high seas. It seems they will now be brought to Australia. The government says their final destination is yet to be determined, but one aspect of their fate remains unchanged.
They won't remain in Australia. They will not be resettled in Australia. That is the policy of the Australian government, and there is no change to our policy on any front.
The asylum seekers will be taken on shore on the Cocos Islands tomorrow, and it's expected they'll then be transferred to the Curtin RAF base in WA. There they'll be assessed by Indian consular officials. Indians will be returned to India, and it's Indian officials who will now assess who else they'll accept.
They will also consider the return of non-Indian citizen residents who may be Sri Lankan nationals.
Labor said many weeks ago that as the vessel was close to Christmas Island, it made sense to process people on Christmas Island. It's only been Scott Morrison's ego that's prevented that.
The Minister maintains this does not represent a policy failure, but definitive statements of the recent past may now have to be revised.
There is certainly some quiet satisfaction that we have stopped the boats, if not for all time, at least for 6 months.
The legal ramifications of all this are still far from clear, but lawyers can be expected to argue that as the asylum seekers were brought to the country by the government itself, they're not unauthorised arrivals, and they do have rights under the Migration Act. It has certainly already raised hopes in the Australian Tamil community.
For them, if they're in Australia, they would believe the Australian system will take care of them. That is not just the government, particularly the legal system. They're very happy about the legal system.
Although this may have implications for the case now before the High Court, the legal team acting for the Tamils says it welcomes the developments. Michael Brissenden, ABC News, Canberra.